Emil Hans was 23 when he left California with a sense of purpose and possibility. He'd graduated from art school in the early 70s and started teaching pottery and jewellery making at Pepperdine University, but it wasn't enough for him. One evening he told his mother he wanted to do something more meaningful, something that used his skills for good. She suggested the Peace Corps. The Peace Corps is a volunteer program run by the United States government, aimed at promoting international understanding and sustainable development through service in partner countries. Volunteers are typically American citizens, often with a college degree, who undergo around 3 months of intensive training before serving abroad for 2 years in a school, NGO, non-profit organisation or government office, contributing to the social and economic development of low to middle income countries. After his training, Emil was posted to the Kingdom of Tonga, a tropical archipelago in the South Pacific consisting of 171 islands. With a population of just over 100,000, most Tongans live on the main island of Tonga Taboo, centred around the capital, Nuku'alofa. The country is lush, isolated and culturally rich, surrounded by lagoons and limestone cliffs. Emil was captivated. In Tonga, Emil befriended another volunteer, Dennis Priven, 22 years old and originally from Brooklyn, New York. Priven was a tough-talking maths prodigy whose brilliant mind was as sharp as his biting wit. Where Emil was warm and easygoing, Dennis was cool and condescending, intellectually gifted, but often emotionally remote. His skills were valuable in Tonga as the country had a long farming tradition, but not enough fertile land to go around, and there was a shortage of science and maths teachers to prepare young Tongans for the technical and engineering jobs of the future. Despite their contrasting personalities, the two men would go hiking together through the island's jungles and coastline, then drink and play cards long into the humid evenings. Emil soon learned that his new friend was something of a card sharp, who used his mathematical mind to read his opponent's hand, detecting patterns with unnerving precision. But Emil didn't mind, content with the camaraderie and the beauty of island life. That harmony shifted 2 years into their service, with the arrival of 23-year-old Deborah Gardner. Deborah had just completed her degree at Washington State University, and from an early age she'd been committed to public service, volunteering in hospitals and dreaming of making a difference. She was posted to Tonga High School, where she taught science and economics. Tall, athletic and self-assured, Deborah had an approachable, earthy charm. She dressed simply in denim and khaki, reserved makeup for formal occasions, and embraced the Tongan culture wholeheartedly, washing her clothes by stomping on them in a basin, decorating her hut with native crafts, and zipping around the island on her bicycle. Her warmth made her popular, both with fellow Peace Corps volunteers and the local community. But she also drew the attention of Dennis Priven. Dennis quickly became infatuated. He lingered outside the school where Deborah taught, attempting to create accidental encounters. Despite her polite but firm disinterest, she eventually agreed to dinner at his home, but what she found on arrival was deeply unsettling. She had expected a casual meal between friends, but Priven had prepared an overly romantic setting with luxury food, flickering candles, and an expensive gift laid out on the table. What he had hoped would be an intimate evening was uncomfortable for Deborah. She understood why others had described him as serious, weird, brooding, and romantically oafish. She left abruptly, pedalling off into the night on her bicycle. Later, she told a friend he must have spent close to $100 on the meal. "Doesn't he know I don't want to go out with him?" she asked. Her friend replied, "You have to tell him that." But Deborah didn't know how she could have been clearer. Priven's behaviour was already alarming. He carried a serrated diving knife on his belt wherever he went, and he avoided eye contact in conversations, radiating unease. Still, Priven persisted, turning up unexpectedly at her home and loitering at the school until the vice principal eventually had to ask him to stay away. One morning, Deborah discovered that some disturbing sketches of skulls had been scribbled on the door of her hut overnight. Realising the threat he posed, she requested a transfer to another island, but her request was denied by Mary George, the Peace Corps director in Tonga. By now, Priven's obsession had moved from being an irritation to presenting a serious danger, but Deborah was left to navigate the threat alone. Despite this, she refused to let him ruin her experience. She had grown close to Emil, enamoured by the dark-haired young man with his slightly scruffy beard and genuine smile, and the two began a discreet relationship, fearful of Priven's reaction. When Dennis spotted them walking home together after a Peace Corps party, laughing and pushing their bikes through the darkened streets, his jealousy became rage. For all Priven's mathematical prowess, he couldn't calculate how Deborah could be attracted to Emil over him, believing himself to be far more handsome and intelligent. Though he didn't confront them that night, his behaviour escalated, and the stalking became more aggressive. Emil and Deborah became aware that sometime before Deborah had arrived on the island, Priven had been smitten with another female Peace Corps volunteer, and had crept into her bungalow one night and cut off a chunk of her hair with his diving knife. Emil, once his friend, began watching him carefully, sensing that something was building. They could all feel it, even if no one yet knew what was coming. It happened less than a week after Emil and Deborah were seen walking together on the evening of Thursday, 14th of October 1976. Emil had gone to watch a film with friends when he was suddenly alerted that something had happened at Deborah's hut. He raced back on his bike and was met with a chilling scene. Blood smeared across the floor and walls, with bloody handprints trailing along the plaster. Deborah was gone. A neighbour told him she had been taken to the hospital. Emil pedalled furiously, confused and horrified, with no idea what had transpired. Earlier that evening, a local boy had heard screaming. Running to investigate, he saw a tall Western-looking man dragging Deborah's limp body out of her doorway. When the man noticed the boy watching, he dropped the body and fled on a bicycle. Neighbours placed Deborah in the back of a truck and rushed her to hospital. On the way, someone asked, "Who did this to you?" Her reply was simply, "Dennis Priven." They would be her final words. Deborah died en route, having suffered 22 stab wounds to her neck, back and torso, with defensive wounds on her hands and blunt force trauma to the head. Police found a metal pipe, a bloodied sandal, and a serrated diving knife at the scene, all later linked to Priven. There hadn't been a murder in Tonga for nearly a decade, and local authorities quickly ruled out any Tongan involvement. The suspect was undoubtedly an American and a member of the Peace Corps. Deborah had been loved by the locals and volunteers alike, and the community was shaken by her murder. Her openness, her dedication to her students, and her ready smile had made her a part of Tongan life, but now she was gone. The grieving Emil went to Priven's home, suspicious that he was involved. He found the lights off and an open bottle of pills on the floor, so he gathered other volunteers and began searching the coastline, uncomfortably torn between desire to ensure Priven faced justice and concern that he might have tried to harm himself. They searched a local cliffside lookout where Priven was known to go, and Emil peered over the edge into the dark sea, but saw nothing. Then word came. Priven had walked into the police station. He was covered in blood, shaking, with superficial cuts on his wrists and signs of a drug overdose. He claimed he had taken Darvan, a painkiller, and was treated under guard. When questioned, he remained silent until he finally asked for pen and paper, on which he wrote, "I have nothing to say." Emil visited him at the station and asked simply, "Why did you do it?" Priven looked at him with an unreadable expression, refusing to meet his eyes, then said coldly, "It proves I'm insane." No more than a few hours had passed since the murder, and he was already laying the groundwork for a calculated insanity defence. 2 days after Deborah's death, her body was quietly shipped back to the United States. There was no media presence, no press releases, and no public memorial by the Peace Corps. In Nuku'alofa, the evidence was damning. A witness had seen Priven dragging Deborah's body. Her dying words named him. His diving knife and sandal were found at the scene, and his fingerprints were in her hut. Under Tongan law, he faced a sentence of life imprisonment or execution by hanging. But the Peace Corps had other concerns. Peace Corps Director Mary George sent a telegram to her superiors in Washington. In it, she deliberately omitted the fact that Priven, an American volunteer, was the suspect. Instead, she implied that local police were investigating a Tongan neighbour. Behind the scenes, US officials scrambled. The director of the Peace Corps at the time, John Dellenbach, appointed by President Ford and closely tied to the political scene, was more focused on campaigning than confronting scandal. The organisation sat on news of the murder for 19 days, only releasing a short statement on 2nd of November, coincidentally just hours before the presidential election. The story barely made a ripple in American newspapers. The priority in Washington wasn't justice for Deborah, it was containment. While Priven awaited trial, he proposed a bizarre legal scheme, trying to convince Emil Hons to confess to the crime during the trial, ensuring Priven's acquittal. Priven promised he would later admit to the murder, so both would be protected under double jeopardy laws. Sensibly, Emil declined to have anything to do with it. Meanwhile, Mary George, who was a born-again Christian, claimed to have had a vision in church that Priven was innocent. From that moment on, she bent the rules in his favour, manipulating local process and lobbying for his release. While Tongan authorities prepared for the trial, the Peace Corps dispatched a crackerjack lawyer at breakneck speed and flew in a psychologist from Hawaii who examined Priven and concluded he was suffering from latent paranoid schizophrenia. Tongan prosecutors were dubious, but had no funds to provide an independent psych evaluation. In the absence of any contradictory evidence, the jury deliberated for just 26 minutes before finding him not guilty due to reason of insanity. Though cleared in court, the Tongan justice system hesitated to release him outright. Under pressure from the US, a deal was struck, which meant Priven would be deported to America and committed to the Sibley Memorial Psychiatric Hospital in Washington, D.C. It was a promise made to appease Tongan authorities, but it wasn't a promise that would be kept. In January 1977, Dennis Priven was deported and returned to American soil, but after just 2 days of psychiatric evaluation, doctors found that Priven showed no signs of schizophrenia, and he was no longer deemed a threat to himself or society. He was quietly discharged and returned to his old life in Brooklyn, where he secured a government job as a computer supervisor for a salary of $80,000 a year. The Tongan prosecutor was perplexed and concerned by the incident, saying, "It appeared to me that all pity was with Priven, and none was shown to the dead girl. I find this very strange justice." For decades, Deborah Gardner's family believed that their daughter's killer remained institutionalized. It wasn't until author Philip Weiss began investigating the case in the early 2000s that they discovered the truth. Dennis Priven had walked free after just 48 hours in hospital. Deborah's mother Alice felt that in the eyes of the Peace Corps and the government, her daughter had never existed, except as an inconvenient truth that could threaten the future of the program and its leaders' political aspirations. Weiss arranged an interview with Priven and found that the intervening years had done nothing to activate his conscience, as the unpunished killer told him that Deborah had deserved it. Weiss was horrified by the man's attitude and wrote, "He treated the murder and his release as a form of accomplishment, not something to be regretted." A panel of psychiatrists who discussed the murder in 2005 as a case study concluded it was highly unlikely Priven had ever suffered from schizophrenia, latent or otherwise, and probably had narcissistic personality disorder. A 1994 law allowed federal prosecutors to file charges against US citizens who kill fellow Americans overseas, but this was not in effect at the time of Deborah's death. Even if Congress had amended it retroactively, it wouldn't have applied because Priven had already been tried in Tonga. He had slipped through a legal loophole and the Peace Corps' reputation had been preserved, at the expense of a young woman's life. Priven lived out the remainder of his years in relative obscurity and, so far as anyone knows, avoided killing anyone else. He died on 1st of April 2023, aged 70. When Emil heard the news, he said, "The world is a little brighter today." The tragedy left an indelible mark on Deborah's family, friends, and everyone in Tonga who had known her. The island community was left baffled by the judicial gambits of a world-leading nation which was supposedly spreading its knowledge to developing countries, yet seemed to care little for justice. Had Peace Corps program leader Mary George agreed Deborah's request to transfer to another island due to Priven stalking, this story of a passionate young woman who wanted to make a positive impact on the world might have had a very different ending. You've been listening to Prasha's Murder Map, I just want to say a big thank you to everyone who's been supporting the show by listening, commenting and leaving me a thumbs up. Also, a warm welcome to all the new subscribers who've joined me recently. I'll be keen to hear your thoughts on this tragic murder where the killer, Dennis Priven, escaped justice. Let me know in the comments, and I'll be back again very soon with another true crime episode.